Speaking with Irvine Weekes at his home in Moose Jaw, 1326 Vaughan Street, on August 2nd, 1977, as part of an oral history study of black immigrants in Saskatchewan, funded by the Saskatchewan Archives and Department of Culture and Youth. Irvine, could you identify yourself, state your name, date of birth, and place of birth?
Yeah. My name is Irvine Weekes. I was born in Bridgetown, Barbados, March the 28th, 1933.
Can you tell me something about your family background in Barbados? Like, what does your
Sure.
father do?
Yeah, well, my father is an electrical engineer, and he works with the one power company in the island. My mother was always a housewife. There were 8 children in the family, 5 girls and 3 boys. Let me see, I would probably run about, I think it was the first boy, so that would make me number 4. There were actually 3 girls before me. The first boy, really.
What does the older kids do?
Yeah, okay. My eldest sister, she lives in New York right now. She's married and has one son, about 22, and I think he has just completed university, and he's in one of the electrical sciences, I believe. But before that, she worked in Barbados in the what would have called the more or less the healthcare kinds of services, especially with the more or less the adopted children, quote, the Nightingale Home. I don't know if you know that one. She worked there. My second sister, Norma, and my first sister's name was Jean. Anyway, the second one, she worked as a secretary, and she's unmarried, but she's taken quite an active part in politics right now, and it's really, yeah, and is a member of the, she hasn't been elected, but she's a member of the ruling party, sort of.
She's in the party?
Yes, she is actually the vice chairman now of I think it's the sanitation board in Barbados. You know, they have all got boards now, sort of replacing.
Like Crown Corporation?
Yes, right. We would call this would be Crown Corporations.
What's the ruling party they now?
The Barbados Labour Party with, I think Tom Adams is Prime Minister.
Would she be Norma Weekes?
Yes, that's my sister.
Norma Weekes?
Yes, that's right.
I know her really well.
Right, okay. Then my next sister, or the third one just before me, and I suppose she has the oddest, her name is Tekla. And she's, a combination of a housewife, part-time kind of worker. She is married, and she's got, four children, 3 boys and 1 girl.
Still in Barbados?
Yes, they're all in Barbados. Her husband, he is a senior civil servant with the agricultural department. His name is Keith Street from Bloomsbury. I don't know if you might know that name.
George?
Right.
Yeah.
St. Thomas Theos on the border.
Bloomsbury, oh yeah,
right.
That's right.
Okay. She works occasionally as a kind of a sort of a supervisor of, it's more or less a combination of a clothing, food outfit called the Civic.
Yeah,
You know
Civic.
that, with people like, right?
Something like the co-op.
Right,
Here.
kind of co-op type of thing in a sense, really, but just digressing a few minutes here is that it tends to really meet really a lot of the needs of very sort of people with very low economic kinds of sort of background or low income. So that's it. Then there was myself, so I'll pass myself over and come back later anyway. Then my second, or rather the sixth or the fifth one would be my first second brother, and his name is Arlie, and he is really a seaman, but had spent a lot of time in the printer's trade. He worked quite a bit with running the linotype machines and those sort of things when they had a second newspaper in Barbados called the Barbados Recorder, which was owned by Cole.
How long ago would that be?
Well, that ceased to exist just about, I'd say, in about 1960. it ran quite a bit there. And
You said your dad was an electric engineer for the power company in Barbados. What kind of qualifications did he have for that job?
well, really, that was just a matter of sort of learning on the job type of thing in the beginning. In that, well, really, originally he had some experience when the trains did exist in Barbados, and he brought that kind of skill into the field. Most of the training would be on the job, but later on in his later years, he did get some kind of a formal training, basically through some courses being actually developed by some of the senior engineers from England who really ran the plant.
In Barbados?
You know, but these, well, I call these kind of sort of middle-aged gentlemen anyway, through these academic skills. But the interesting thing was how well they were able to really, you know, absorb and really carry
Was
on.
that training done locally, or?
Yes, it was done right within the center. The way it worked, and I think about this simply because, you know, that was at a time when I was still going to school, so you know, studying with your father is quite an interesting thing, eh? But the fact was that he would have to do these courses after work, and then he'd have his homework at night, and then, you know,
Work together.
work together. So I thought that was, you know, that kind of a system. But in general, really, most of the knowledge that he acquired really came from. Actually, I did say he was still, he's just retired last year. I mean, he had put in something like 36 years service with this.
Same company. Okay, tell me something about yourself, Irvine. You personally, when you left primary school, what happened to you before you came?
Well, let me see. Well, before I came to Canada, I worked in about 3 different areas. I think it's a very kind of, you know, diverse background. First, I worked as an assistant to an assessor. Land and houses and taxes. The name John Maynard might ring a bell. He was the government assessor at that time. So, but this was mostly on a part-time type of basis because when I had finished school, jobs were not easily available. So I did that.
What kind of, what kind of formal education did you have in Barbados?
Oh, yeah, I attended an elementary school first and foremost, and then I attended Combermere School, which would be a secondary school comparative really to some of the high schools here. And following that...
Was it paid? Did you have to pay?
Yes, I paid, yeah. In those days, I paid about $8 a term.
That's right.
Yeah, you know, but that was a lot of money to really
It's sort
put
of a
out.
government school, right?
It is a government. It is a government school. There were scholarships, but there were fewer. You know, there were more students paying than there were scholarships available to the students. So quite a few of us really paid, and at that time there were only 4 schools at that kind of level. There may be ones, but the ones I could remember would be Foundation and Coleridge Prairie. Well, Lodge and Harrison College were 2 higher schools.
I see,
Right.
yeah.
Foundation, Coleridge Prairie, Allen School, and Combermere. They actually had to meet all of the, you know, the needs of the students really having exited from Port Elementary School. It used to be, there were some government scholarships, but really, you know, the number of people really applying, you know, more than triple really the things. Having completed that,
What kind of education would that be?
well, that would be that was comparable. Comparing it now, because we did discover this at that time. Really, that would have compared to Saskatchewan grade 11.
At that time?
Yes. Well, that was something that when I came here, that was, you know, worked out. You got a full grade 11 for that, no more.
So
Although,
what do you think of it personally, though?
Well,
to standards.
that was a poor rating, really.
You thought?
Very poor, simply because, well, not only for myself, I'm sure, really, but for a number of other, quote, you know, the fellow Barbadians, and for that reason, West Indians, you know, that kind of really kind of retard one's success, because you had to go back and study things that, you know, you already knew to some extent. There were some new areas, I would grant that, in that areas like science and physics and so on, really. In the schools in Barbados at that time, those subjects were only offered at the other two higher schools levels, which would be Harrison College and Lodge, and that was when you entered, quote, the upper six and that type of thing.
Yeah.
That was for a small group of people.
Upper six would be like what?
Okay,
Here?
upper
Grade
six,
two.
yeah. Well, I don't think there's anything comparable here. It would be above. It would be. You could almost say an upper six would possibly would be at a what you would consider junior college kind of sort of level, huh? First year, you would think that. One of the other things behind that too is that the education system in Barbados, and which I'm sure affected all West Indians too, was based on an English system. Either you wrote after your maybe what sort of 8 years up to 8 years in a secondary school, you wrote what was called the Oxford and Cambridge, or the Cambridge, one of those two. Okay, the secondary schools like Combermere, Harrison College, Combermere Foundation, and Coleridge, Barry, and Allen, we all wrote the Cambridge. Those are the Cambridge. Whereas at Harrison College, you wrote a combination of the Oxford and Cambridge. Okay, but in essence, that would have still given you basic entrance requirements. If you were going to an English university, you could get in on this.
The same.
Yes,
same
you were accepted that. They did have kind of levels. You could get a grade 1, grade 2, and grade 3. Grade 3 said you just met the minimum. Usually grade 2 would be about the average, which is what I really got. In general though, looking at the education, although the subjects probably might have been a bit fewer, you know, I was more, I think in general people were much more well kind of sort of in tune, more knowledgeable about those subjects. For an example, if you did classics, which would be things like Latin, French, and these types of subjects, as opposed to modern studies, which may be just straight a more stronger English literature type of thing. You know, you were pretty well versed in it, really. If you did mathematics, then you majored in mathematics, sort of thing. Subjects like French and this kind of thing, these types of subjects, really, just to clue you in on what I mean about the difference in styles, is that the French that they were offering grade 12, you know, I'd done that actually in at least about a fourth form.
Fourth form in Barbados.
And just to clue you in, later on I told you about a family that I met in just an oral conversation earlier.
Yeah.
It was precisely through this type of a situation that I got to know them.
I see.
You know.
Okay, you said earlier that you worked as an assistant to a surveyor or an assessor.
Yes.
And you also said that it was just sort of part-time because it was difficult to find a job there.
Right.
What did you do after that?
Right.
You worked part-time.
After that, I got a job working now with the sanitation department. This was the year that looked after collecting all the garbage and keeping all the areas clean.
Yeah.
My job there, and again this was a temporary thing for a while too. I worked there for a year really, but my job there was to look at more or less assigning the whole fleet, which was for the entire city, the city of Bridgetown, to the various kinds of jobs, you know, various areas, routes they had to take, check those people out, and then wait till they come in, which would possibly, because it started as early as 6 in the morning, the drivers, you see, and the trucks, you know, and then they'll probably back about midday, and then made sure that they'd all done what was required of them. And then I also had the job of actually looking after the payroll too, because they all got paid weekly. So, you know, it was a combination of really sort of directing the fleet in that sense and doing the books. I just worked with one other chap. There were just two of us there.
Was this a city job or
This was city, yeah.
City.
At that time, you know, the city, they had a central, or rather you had what you would consider provincial government, you had a city government. In other words, you had these, what we used to call city councils.
Yeah.
And they ran all the cities, like almost each parish rather had a parish council. That's what it was.
Yeah.
And they ran all the immediate services in that city, in that parish. Like Christchurch had one at Oistins, and Bridgetown had one at, Bridgetown was right down at in the lower part of Bridgetown. St. Peter's, St. Andrews, they all had one, and they were really responsible for really directing, you know, the local kinds of administration until after they changed the system and government actually embraced all of that into.
So this job, this job that you're talking about sounds rather interesting. You've got your hands in just about several things, mostly clerical, I suppose. and sort of somewhat administrative, even though it might be at a junior level. How long do you stay in that job, and what
For one
happens
year,
after that?
right? For 1 year, and then underline all of this, which is the next thing that I did do, and presumably I'm going to continue after too. But I really became very interested in journalism, and did 2 courses in through a school in England anyway, and it was through getting involved in this that I really got my next job, which was working for the next 3 years as well. I worked right up to sub-editor with the still existing large newspaper, the Barbados Advocate. So okay, what happened was that was a combination, because I think that was very exciting anyway. In that for the first 2 years I worked without pay, because that was one of the conditions of the course that I was taking. I had to have some practical experience, and I was assigned to the editor of the Barbados Advocate, who was a very, I know, a real good teacher, I have to say that, but a very frank kind of person, and I thought he was a little bit too kind of sort of hard, because it's not exactly a discriminatory kind of thing, but he still had this real colonial type of attitude.
Was he a local person or British?
Well, presumably, I don't know whether he was born, whether he came from Britain to the West Indies or not, but I think he was a local, Britisher born in Barbados kind of thing. His name was George Hunt. You probably might have heard his name.
Colonial expatriate.
Right. That took me into a number of things, because I covered extensively then things like reports in the legislature, a lot of areas in criminal fields like reporting in the courts and so on. And then I think my last assignment before really changing my job, and I'll explain that why in the next kind of thing, was in the recreational area in sports. So I spent those 3 years. Why did I leave it? Well, journalism is not really a paying job, and you got to work hard and work long. And at that time, I was still being kind of sort of supported, outweighed by my parents. The hours are very long, in that I would possibly have to start work in the morning at 10 and go right through, and would never get home until 3 a.m. the next morning, because we had to see that there was a couple of breaks for lunch, but in general you had to follow through, and since most papers are done a day ahead, you've got to fix that up. Well, I like it in a way, but I had to see my parents' viewpoint, in that there was no kinds of financial input into it.
Yeah.
And I suppose when you look at Barbados history, a lot of it, as far as work is concerned, is still to this extent tied into the civil service. A lot of the jobs are provided by government, so naturally my parents, suggested that I looked at, one of those kinds of jobs, and that's where I started next.
Yeah, why is that?
Well, the job was this, because it's more secured.
Yeah.
It's the one job that always had, for an example, a good, what I call a good sort of tied-in system, in that if you work long enough, you will have a pension and you could retire. Many of the other jobs in Barbados did not carry this, although the civil service really was the lowest paying. Really, an example of that is that my first paycheck in the Barbados civil service was exactly $26.
$26 a month?
That was when the total pay was $40, and when they took out for widows and orphans funds and pension, I used to take on 26 Barbados
dollars. How long
dollars.
ago would that be?
Well, that was I came here in 1956, so that would have been in 50, say about around 53, 54, 55.
Yeah.
That's
Getting to come in here, why did you come here?
Right.
How did you first hear
Right.
Saskatchewan?
Now, while I was in the civil service, and my first job in the civil service again happened to be almost similar to what I'd done with the sanitation board. I got being involved with the highways and transport department, and that also involved the system of dealing with a lot of people, again assigning them daily tasks. They did more in terms of drawing materials for building roads and all of that sort of stuff. Coming with that job also demanded that I had to look after all the books, meaning that I had to account for all the payroll as well as all the costing of materials and so on. And through that, I really became interested in commerce. I wanted to do full accountancy then, and really set about to see what what opportunities there were. That was relatively what I call the beginning of of my kind of sort of coming to Canada, and
That would be what year?
that would be in '55. So it took me the whole of '55 anyway to get information, relating to what where I could further myself in this field. And
You got this by writing? Or?
yes, oh yeah, I got to call it research in a sense. I possibly spend most of my non-working time, meaning between, or sort of what I call leisure time, which would be between 5 in the evening and maybe 7 at night in the Barbados library. And they only had one book in that whole library with all the available Canadian areas. I did not choose to go to England simply because, and I think, I'm glad about that, was my parents kind of sort of wise move in, in sort of passing to that. Presumably I could have gone to, but they felt that the lifetime might have been a little bit kind of sort of harder, which from what they had seen.
They were in England?
No, they had never been in England, but what they had seen was, if you remember, used to be a thing called the mobile cinema in Barbados, which showed you, people moving abroad and this kind of stuff. And unfortunately, the picture wasn't meant for that. It was really meant to show the effects of, or rather, the end results of tuberculosis, for an example, where people, went underfed, and naturally it would depict these scenes where people were trying to succeed.
Yeah.
And so they kind of felt that that wasn't a good thing, even though I wanted to go then simply because, being young on the one hand, but they kind of insisted, so we passed that up, really. I bypassed that. And I started out by getting accepted at what was then Carleton College, is now Carleton University.
Ottawa.
In Ottawa. They had said I could come and do my studies there. The problem that annoyed that was the finances, you see, because they had, insisted that you have a fair amount of money to really sort of come along. Well, it was while corresponding with, I never met the man anyway, but it must have been the registrar anyway who did most of the signing letters. It was he who suggested that I should, look at possibly still coming and going into some other area where I could make some money.
Yeah.
And for some reason or other, I don't know how this really came about, but that they suggested I try Saskatchewan. Because of the, this was just, rain. They suggested that they try Saskatchewan, and especially in the area of what was known as the public health sort of thing, okay, and the health service field. Well, I got a few names anyway, and just started corresponding from there.
You got the names from contacts?
Yes, just from contacts now, really. And there was Weyburn. The three places was Weyburn, North Battleford, and Moose Jaw. And this would be, again, this is in 1955, because I came here, in the middle of '56, kind of sort of thing. Anyway, the correspondence, it's quite interesting, because most of them said, well, of the three centers, rather, I didn't apply at Moose Jaw. It was Weyburn and North Battleford. What happened was that all the other were in the same province. It was interesting how, the two centers rated my education background quite differently.
How they rated it?
Yeah, quite differently. One source said, well, we wasn't sure you had a grade 11. What would compare to those grade 11 because you had to do this, and it was even suggested there that maybe I could, get some correspondence courses, of which I knew nothing about. There's a correspondence school here. And I kind of sort of even had contemplated doing that simply because that might have still been a chance to really get started. But at the same time, I had written to North Battleford as well. And I'll explain this later because that's a very interesting incident too. I kind of feel that they would have, said the same thing. But just suddenly I got this letter with saying, come as soon as you can.
What did you apply to do?
Well, I had to, now, part of the thing said that you could come and be a psychiatric nurse, but you had to start at the student's level. Okay? In other words, you could work in the hospital as an aide, but that wasn't what, I was interested, maybe I would have done that too, but that wasn't suggested to me. It said, okay, you could come and start as a student. And the things were quite exciting about it. For one reason, the pay, because they were paying you right off. I think it would mean that I would end up with almost a net of about $120. When it come to the center, they would provide meals and every sort of thing for me. So that was a good start comparing what I was really kind of sort of earning in Barbados at the time to begin with. And the second bit was rather one of the peculiar conditions was that even though you were a student, you had to be part of a union system. So one of the conditions is if you took this student sort of position, it was conditioned that you would also become a member of the unions, and the unions in Saskatchewan hospitals, like other places, are well organized.
That'd be like a workers' union.
Yes, it is a workers' union. Yeah. So okay, and that brought me here really. I think the interesting thing, reflecting on that, was that I had no idea of a mental hospital, because that's what it was. I live right in front of one. The mental hospital in Barbados is the other side of the street, and I'd gone there often enough. I'd seen many people, but never really had any real serious look at what it really involved. On the second thing though, I felt very strongly that even in most of the jobs that I did do, especially in Barbados, outside of the journalism brought me into contact with a lot of people. I met lots of people, but like working in the highways and transport and working with the sanitation department, I really got involved with more direct contact and individual approaches to people, which I think had a bearing. I kind of recognize this now. I usually often say that the last year in the service there, really I spent most of my time organizing, not in the union structure, organizing activities for the workers, because there were 350 people working at highways and transport.
What kind of activities?
And like social, it would be anything from drama to cricket to dominoes, because a lot of these people didn't have any social really outlet. And I remember they just appointed a new position called a personnel officer, and his role was to try and really, make work a pleasant experience beyond the day-to-day kinds of drudgery or moving stones or driving a truck or whatever have you, that people could feel that, there was something to really relax.
Okay. Could we come back to North Battleford? So you finally got accepted there.
Yes.
As a student nurse,
right,
or student psych nurse. What kind of problems did you get in the in the immigration process? Like
in the immigration process, right? Okay. For me, it was more what I call a waiting kind of situation. In other words, and you got to keep reflecting the then and the now. Okay, at that time, there was no immigration, sort of Canadian immigration representative in Barbados. The closest one was in Trinidad. Right? And the process said that you had to send, you had to get all the medicals and send them to Trinidad. And there, they were either accepted or rejected.
Just like that.
Just like that. Okay, if the chap in Trinidad said, well, you hadn't made that, that was it, right? And then one of the other stipulations was that having done all of that, then you still had to bring all these big X-ray forms, etc., along with you, and some money to show that in case when you arrived at the port, that you would have to really, if they wasn't still going to accept you, then you could go back. So the immigration one was more of what I call a patient waiting type of thing, because it took time for me to, by the time I got one correspondence answered, if it said, right, we want you to go and get a series of immunization, we want to get a series of x-rays and send these on and let's know what the tests are like, and okay, send them to us. By the time we got that and waited for them, and it was obvious that there were other people too, so it was more of that kind of sort of thing. What I felt was much more the problem, but it worked out well, was that these people had said that they would have to start in North Balford at a certain time, you see, which was like they had a kind of a system that started somewhere in September, but they like you to be there in August, you see, to get a wee bit of a kind of an orientation, and then from September on to roughly the same way as any school system would work, you were expected to.
When did you arrive in North Balford?
Well, I came very late. I never came here until September '56, and I should have been here really in about, as early as possible July, late July, early August. When I did arrive, the courses
Straight
are
northbound?
yes. When I did arrive, the courses were already something like 4 weeks started. But interestingly enough, the reception was very good. The people with whom I had to deal with were very nice indeed, and I would like to think that a lot of the credit must go to, I don't know if this lady is still in the province or not, but she was the personal officer, and from what I could gather later, she had just taken that position. And noticing, as a matter of fact, it was her who would point out to me that the reasons why I possibly, got that letter of acceptance is that when she arrived, she saw these documents in process on on her desk, so she just picked them up and okayed them. The guy previous to her, maybe he might have meant to do something about it, but they just sat there. Okay, so that really kind of sort of helped a little bit in terms of making it a nice thing. Then when I arrived, then I was late for the course, but there were very nice people there. Between the personnel officer and the director of nursing and her assistant, and they really immediately facilitated the thing very well for me by sort of, instead of making me wait for another year because I should have, they actually kind of made sure I got all the materials, the books and whatever have you.
Irvin, you said earlier that you were going to come to Carleton to study commerce.
Right, that's right.
And here you are now in North Battleford. In what year was that again?
This is in 56 now.
1956,
Yes.
in a psychiatric hospital.
Right.
What was on your mind then?
Well, really I was still interested at that time. Up to then I was still planning to go back to Carleton really, because the thing was is that I was there originally to make money.
To go to Carleton.
To go back.
For commerce.
But that was in 56, okay, 57. At the end of the first year, and I have to use this person that I mentioned, the personnel officer, I have to say had a tremendous impact on changing my thing, because at the end of the first year, I still felt I'd made enough money that I could have gone.
Yeah.
But there were a class of about 90 students, and I had placed fourth in that group. And they said, well, Cheek, given your kind of background and your hardships, and you could do so well, why not stick it for another year? And it's only a third year on beyond this, you see. So I kind of said, well, okay, we'll try it for a second year. Well, by the time I'd reached the second year in the psych nursing course, I was fairly well, sort of a little bit more sure that was an area, because I did see a lot of things that had a lot of what I call humanistic kinds of sort of concepts and things that really appealed to me. So I stuck there.
Okay, so how long was this course? 3 years?
3 years.
And you
right.
finished it in
Finished
North
it.
Battleford?
That's right.
Yeah. What was your...
Well, I got a
qualification?
diploma in psychiatric nursing, which was what was the standard requirements for any student.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, do you remember the exact date or time that you arrived in North Battleford?
Yeah. It was a Friday. It would be a Saturday morning about 2:30 a.m.
2:37
Yes,
morning.
and
What date?
that would have been, I don't exactly remember the day. It was in September anyway. I can't really recall. I could if I look up my records. I still got that. But the thing about that was,
That was what year again?
in 1956,
56. Yeah.
and it was kind of cool. September, if you
September.
live in the West Indies, September, you wouldn't recognize it, but it was cool here. Anyway, I remembered coming to this massive place, which was all fairly heavily treed, because the buildings were kind of more or less sort of, they had the English type of approach, a lot of bricks on the one hand, and they were in between a lot of trees, and it was hard seeing. But having arrived there, nobody knew. Nobody knew, precisely why I was there. In other words, the receptionist had no information as to, who I was and that sort of thing. But that was cleared in about an hour's time, in that the head nurse on nights, he had been left a note saying that I should have arrived, say, about 2 days before.
By the personnel officer.
Right, so he was really quick, and then I kind of got myself settled into a large sort of dorm for males, which was on the hospital grounds too.
Okay. In those the early years in North Battleford, how did you find life there? Just having come from Barbados, totally different environment. Like, must have had to make some fairly significant adjustments. What
Yes.
was the nature?
Yeah,
of
the biggest adjustment to me was in a sense really getting to understand or getting to overcome not exactly a dislike but a very unfriendly approach. And it wasn't that because people hated you, it was because really I discovered later that most of the fellow students, for an example, that studied with me, even though they were Canadians, were themselves from out of that city. And it was new to them. They had come from neighboring towns.
Oh, there were new people.
There
as
were new
well.
people too. You know, like the example to bring it quickly is that we in the West Indies are so outgoing. You know, you would scarcely walk the street without seeing a person morning and at least getting the reply "Good morning."
Yeah.
But to say that and find everybody staring at you, you know, and then I presume the other effect of that was that adjustment would be more in terms that it was new and different to them. They had never seen, let's say, a non-white. Let me use it that way, you know, in that kind of a setting. So, you know, here was myself just trying to really fit in. But in a sense, they did. Most of the guys adjusted fairly quickly in terms of being nice. The first day I was there, I missed most of my meals
Yeah.
because I didn't know, you know, what was the way around. And again, it just happened there was a chap who it was a Saturday and most of the students had gone home, you see, and I was left in this building all alone. And the housekeeper came late in the evening and you know and found me there, so she made me a cup of coffee. And she knew there was one other chap who had to stay because he was working in the evening. So she woke him up and he was very nice really and explained to me what, you know, the process was for getting a meal. And it started from there.
Were there many black people in town there or in your course?
No, no. When I went to, yeah, left, turn it off. The other one. Turn it to the right, to the left. Right. Okay. No. And I don't know whether I could say this with all the certainty, but there was no other black people in the hospital. There were some black people, but there were Americans who were playing baseball. But they were not connected to the hospital at all. They were just
living there.
no, they were just there for the season of baseball. But as far as I could remember, I was the first, well, you know, colored person, and in brackets West Indian anyway, that worked in
the hospital.
not in the hospital. That hospital had a population of 19,000, 1900, sort of, if you want to call it, well, patients. And I would say the staff complement at that time would roughly be about between 400 people. And that I was the only person there. The interesting thing about it, I look at it in a very humorous way now, but you know, it was a matter of getting used to stares. You know, people who would stare at you, you know, where you were from and that sort of thing. But the other advantage probably that made it a little bit better for me was that because I could speak English very fluently. Like most people would stop and say, "Excuse me, where did you learn to speak English?
Yeah.
And what's your next language?" You know, and I'd say, "Well, no, that's all I knew." So those things I thought, you know, were not exactly problems, but really issues that I had to face it with.
Okay, were there during your years there? Did you spend 3 years there?
Yes, I spent 3 years there.
After that, what did you do?
Okay, after graduated, I was offered a job because that was the next stage anyway. I was
In the
offered
same hospital?
yes, I was offered a position as a graduate nurse, and I did accept it. But while all of this was happening, part of the program put me into what I am now in really, was in the area of what we call physio-occupational therapy. And at that time, that service was provided by, well, I'd call them transients, but not in that sense. We were really provided by, well, professionals from England who came, and maybe they were usually females, who came on the way across. They were qualified English people. They'd come and work maybe for 6 months, a year at the most, in these institutions and move on. One of the handicaps was that because there were most females, and that they had to deal with males as well to provide the programs, it was always necessary to have at least a male staff almost in the area wherever, you know, these females were given the service, because they were dealing with male patients as well. So what happened was that you were assigned, but I got a bit of a choice in spending more than the time normally students would have spent. So I got as much as in all about a year, and I really found that to be a very good kind of sort of an area I thought I could, you know, learn from. as a result of that, just prior to the end of at the end of graduation, the occupational therapist left and took up a professorship position in North Dakota. And I'd gone to a workshop and met her as being one of the speakers back here in Saskatchewan. And, we got talking, and she had said, well, Chica, that's whether he had ever considered, working beyond the nurse kind of area. So, and I said, well, yeah, I didn't tell her that originally I wanted to be sort of in a commerce type of thing. Yeah. Anyway, she told me about the opportunities which were then being made possible through the government of Saskatchewan. And one area was either I could go on to university through a government bursary and study, or I could go on my own. And I inquired very quickly and found that that was available. I didn't take it right away. I then decided that because the psych nursing in Saskatchewan could work in any area, that is to say, could work in Weyburn, Moose Jaw, or North Battleford, I had spent a fair amount of time really studying about retardation, but had never worked with retarded people. And I asked for a transfer. That was one reason. And they said it was fine. I could come to Moose Jaw because I didn't have to have any more qualifications, you see. It worked. So I came here then.
When was that?
That would be now in 60.
1960?
Yes, 60, yes. I finished really 15. I worked for a while, and then 60 I thought I would move to Moose Jaw and work here at which is the Saskatchewan Training School, now known as Valley View Center. It was during that process then I met Dr. Harrison, who had then moved here to Moose Jaw as the assistant director of the center. So he knew me.
Dr. Harrison?
Dr. Harrison, yes, incidentally was at the time, well, I presume he's really from England anyway, and had come to Canada to work as the psychologist and also a teacher in the psychiatric nurses courses in Saskatchewan, quote, North Battleford. So he taught me there. And then when he noticed that my name was being sort of registered for a transfer, you see, but he had come here before I left North Battleford anyway. He said it was fine. So having arrived here then, the same thing happened. I worked for roughly about 9 months as a nurse, and the occupational therapist was just about to go. And in the meantime, I had applied for and was successful in obtaining a government's bursary. So I went to the University of Queens for the next 2 years and did the requirements there through the University of Queens and what was then the Canadian School of Occupational Therapy. And having done that, there were positions available for me, but I possibly would have gone into another area, not retardation at that time, but I was kind of really, well, interested in that I had never spent much time with retardeds on the one hand, and I felt that my services could be utilized in Moose Jaw, so I kind of weighed up the thing. Instead of going into the area of emotional disturbance, that's what I thought it would then do, you see. I came back here and really I spent most of my time after that in this particular area.
So that's where you are now, in physiotherapy?
Occupational therapy. We've got physiotherapy at therapists as well, but I'm essentially an occupational therapist.
Okay, so you spent altogether how many years in North Battleford?
4, if you see it, 56 to 60.
That's for 4 years.
4 years,
how would you characterize your experiences there, not so much in the academic sense or skill training sense, but as a black person in that community, one of the first non-Canadian black people there, so to speak?
Well, personally, and I will be very honest, I didn't find it difficult at all to adjust, meaning that I seemed able to adjust. The people in general were fairly open, and I could best sort of explain that by saying that most of the people that I work with, there were less problems in terms of feeling really ill at ease, as opposed to feeling that I wasn't really wanted. I think the better part of it would come through the fact that following the arrival of 2 other West Indians, or 2 other Barbadians, really, yes, we found that we got very involved in the community. The involvement came first and foremost through the church. Like we were all Anglicans, you see, And we sang in the choir, after a couple of weeks
Anglican
there,
church,
the Anglican church. And then when we were there, then they had these youth movements. And the young people were just as curious about, blacks and every kind of thing. So we had this whole bit of a lot of speaking engagements. Then when that was well organized, we got into the more musical area.
Yeah.
And I think the best way I could kind of quickly put that is that we ended up becoming a guest artist on some of these amateur shows.
Yeah.
Like we had sung the first time and people heard these calypsos, they'd never heard that, you see. And then the guys as well, the chap on the station said, well, instead of that, we'll have you as guest artists, because they were raising money through these United Travelers things. So that was that. And then we got into sports. I would like to think
What
that,
kind of sports?
well, cricket, for one. Although the local, should I say, North Balfour people didn't really catch on to the game of cricket, they found it interesting, really kind of sort of watching it. And in a way, Barbadians are very noisy and very active. All right. So that became a kind of a thing. Tennis was another one. Lawn tennis became very, 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 very both popular to me and to the people in that area. And possibly the things that would be most interesting was the dominoes, which you probably, as an interviewer would recall. Dominoes came on very strong to the fact that we had almost all the fellow Canadians sitting up till 2 and 3 in the morning playing dominoes, not only watching, but playing it. So I think, that was the kind of impact. And then on the side, I told you I was interested in journalism, so I did a lot of short story writing too. And I used to write a number of articles for the hospital had a local magazine. So I would write either a lot of short stories about Barbadian kinds of sort of structures and, those kinds of things I thought really tended to really, from my viewpoint anyway, add something to the community. But we sure were very active. And I have to say the word we now, because I didn't say it early on, like I was here alone for 6 months.
Yeah.
And then 6 months later, then another gentleman by the name of Edmund Redder, he joined me. And it was then that, yes, he was from Barbados too. As a matter of fact, I don't want to say that this is any kind of, sort of, well, feather in the cap, but I almost would like to feel that having arrived in North Balfour and having had a chance to talk with the personnel officer, within the next 10 months anyway, there were something like 12 other Barbadians who came in short order. And it was simply because they then realized, had a little bit better picture of what the people are playing. To put it, and I don't mean this in any derogatory comment, but some of that mail came to me on what you call surface. In other words, it was sent by boat, because it seemed that Barbados was thought to be somewhere in Canada.
Is that right?
Yes. So what happened was that the mail was then expedited airmail-wise, and a lot of the guys that were waiting for letters, they'd get them. So
up to this point, like you're in Moose Jaw now, in 1977, how long would you have been living in Canada?
In Canada, yeah. Well, altogether I've been here, really, I'm coming close to 21 years for sure.
21 years.
Yes.
Yeah.
A lot of that time I've spent roughly about 5.5 outside of the province doing other kinds of sort of studies, but I've always remained in the government service, so I'm still in that area. But that's probably
Irvine, having lived in Saskatchewan for about 21 years, you've had a good chance to assess the standard of living and the whole Canadian lifestyle with that of Barbados. How do you think they compare in areas of health, education, housing, employment, unemployment, etc.?
Well, in general, and I'll just pick out a few of these. If you look at, for an example, health, let's say the health conditions of Barbadians and needs in terms of service needs are almost the same as they are in Canadian sense, except that you're in two different places, right? Needs. You still need people with a lot of, name it, whether it's physical, whether it's emotional, psychological, whatever have you, they are still the same, so that's true. Perhaps the biggest disadvantage in the two systems is that really in Saskatchewan there seem to be more available kinds of, quote, resources, both financial and manpower, as opposed to in Barbados, where these two things are really lacking. One, not enough money, and secondly, even if they did have it at all, a lot of the personnel aren't trained to deal now with these kinds of problems. So those would be two major sorts of things I would see there.
What about employment, unemployment, housing, etc.?
Housing in just, and I got a view on the basis that I just came up from Barbados last year anyway, and comparing Canadian, okay, the housing situation is better here. In Barbados, there's still a lot of need really for providing, if you want to call it, shelter for local Barbadians. However, it would seem that the system that they're attempting in Barbados actually does make an effort to meet the need, in that they've gone in on a more kind of sort of collective government housing systems where people can own them eventually. In other words, you don't rent them forevermore. You know, there's still a chance that after living in them for 20 years at least, you know.
What class of people would be accessible to with these houses?
Low economic, really, low economic, you know. And meaning that, you know, if you take a Barbadian who would probably now would earn the equivalent of roughly about, say, about 60 Canadian dollars a week. Okay, because Barbadians are making now roughly about 100. That's quite a common. 100 Barbadian dollars a week is what most.
That's the average.
Yes, that's very close to in most skills anyway.
Where did you get that statistic? Because the last statistic I got on the Barbados was the average rate of pay was about $15-16 a week. Average overall.
Average. Yeah. Well, okay.
Overall employment.
I don't have that as a statistic on that thing, but I could use it more if you look at, let's say, comparing people in the what I call the unskilled field, all right, where people work like in the waterfront or in the canes, cane cutting. Cane cutting, you know, is a better paying job now than it was then.
Yeah.
I mean, Barbadians don't even want to cut canes anymore. Anyway, that's better. But if you're talking about the clerical jobs, it's the low pay, which always were. You know, the white collar people still comparatively make smaller salaries than the average Joe there, you know, who may work on the waterfront. And
okay, how have your expectations of Canada been fulfilled, and what kind of major disappointments, if any, have you had? What did you expect?
Well, I'll be honest, I haven't had any real major I think most of the things I set out to do, I think I've fulfilled them really. And I will still say quite honestly that those things which I still want to achieve.
How would you characterize the Canadian immigration policy, Irvine, when you first came here, and how has it changed over the years up to the present?
Well, I think the changes has been for the worst, really, in the sense that at least 20 years ago, it would seem much more feasible that you know, my chances were good. I think now, looking at the new system, they're poor, really, or not so good, because obviously of some of the changes that apparently has been made in the laws. An example of that quickly would be that I think that I could have easily come here as a student 20 years ago, just meeting the requirements of having some money and somewhere to stay type of thing. Whereas now I think there are a lot more requirements than that, you know, that one has to really look into. So I think in that sense it has changed. If you look again in areas of families, it seems much more difficult now for even close relatives to bring close relatives here, as opposed to what it has been 20 years ago.
Are you a Canadian citizen?
Yes, yes.
How long were you?
I took that out about 6 years ago. Yeah, I took that about 6 years ago when it was in Edmonton.
Did you have any problems like being checked out or?
No, it was fairly straightforward there, no problem at all.
So what do you think Saskatchewan or Canada today has to offer the average black, say, West Indian immigrant? Would you advise them to come to Saskatchewan to make a living?
Well, I still think there are lots of opportunities here for blacks, but under the present, should I say, conditions or systems, it would be difficult to really, you know, advise a black that he could easily make it. But there are lots of opportunities. There's still lots of opportunities available.
What kind of cultural and social, economic, and all other kinds of contributions do you think you've made to the Saskatchewan community in your 21 years of living here?
Well, in fairness, I think I have, done quite a bit. I've become very involved in church affairs. At least presently, right now, I'm a member of the board of directors of the Anglican Church to which I belong, St. John's. I've been actually sort of a vice president, secretary, treasurer of service clubs here. Currently, I'm involved in being the coordinator for the city's entire program in minor soccer.
City of Moose Jaw.
The city of Moose Jaw. And a number of untold things. I've spent a number of hours, even work times, going out and talking to various groups with various kinds of sort of organizations, especially in my field with handicapped kids. I've done a bit of consulting work, really voluntarily, for some areas that were in need of it. So I have to feel that it would be the same kind of contributions I would have made if I was in Barbados.
If you had the
Yes.
The qualifications, or if you had the resources behind you to do it.
Yes. Well, really, in a sense, I said just now I hadn't fulfilled my, at least there are some things I want to really complete. For an example of this would be that really I'm just about almost close to finishing a master's program, and I really can, if I so I want, I've got the requirements to teach at universities in my field, but I feel that I don't know whether to pursue that one, but I think I can offer that kind of service eventually to people in Barbados simply because they're now opening up those kinds of avenues, and I think my skills would be quite useful to them.
To teach in Barbados.
Yeah, to teach or as a consultant, really,
yeah,
not necessarily.
That raises a fairly fundamental argument that's put forward during several debates about the immigration of black people to Canada. That is that people come here and get an education and sort of go back home, and Canada loses that money and resources, etc. How would you address yourself in a question like that?
I could best sum it up by just using some of the feedback I've got. I have received letters from the Saskatchewan government who has very openly thanked me very much anyway for returning service on such a long period of time. And I think they're very pleased with that. I really believe that, in a sense, I have given back as much, as I've got from the government, and I'm very conscientious on that, and I really feel that they should get some return from me, and I've done that. So even if I did offer it to someone else now, I don't really feel, should I say, guilty or less kind of sort of uneasy about suddenly going away. I really believe that it can be a twofold type of thing, in that people can still offer some service for service and give it where possibly it can be helpful. To put it in a very simple nutshell, we send, for an example, foreigners, meaning you send Canadians to, quote, the West Indies for short periods of time. Okay, what's wrong, with a West Indian who has really got this kind of, background as well as the experience, not going and offering the same service? I think, for that reason, Canada would be benefiting equally as well from whatever things they have attained from them, because I'm going back to help where I'm more able to than just being, sort of an outsider. So.
Have you got any fairly strong connections with the West Indian community in Saskatchewan?
No, perhaps this is about one of the weakest things. I don't know that there's any really that exists to that extent beyond maybe a cricket type of thing.
Well, I meant apart from social clubs, which there are not very many, individuals. Do you?
No, I don't. Actually, another way to look at this quickly, and is something probably that would serve more for for the record, is that I think the West Indians as a group, when you look at the multicultural, the groups that's springing up, we seem to be the least kind of sort of involved. A fair comparison that quickly would be that I notice even, let's say, the arrival of East Indians into these communities seem to be much more dominant in terms of becoming involved in the communities than, quote, West Indians have. And they're very strong organizations, the East Indians, that is, they're doing, even though they're still within our cultures, but at least they're beginning to, should I say, to manifest it. West Indians, and I would be very honest, since I would tend to think more in terms of Barbadians, we haven't been that much aggressive, or if you call it much, that kind of sort of active in that sense. We've done some things, and I suppose the best way that I could think of a contribution when it came to sports, more so than anything else, surely a lot of the cricket which did exist really was one way of really, being an active group in a different structure, but beyond that I can't think of too much.
Yeah, because I was thinking about the recently concluded Mosaic 77,
Right.
where
There wasn't, yeah.
yeah, and there are at least 2,000 West Indians in the province, and there was
Right.
not a pavilion. I was going to ask, why do you think is the problem? Yeah, but you already
Don't put that to it.
stated this. You've
It's not
already
a
stated the
problem,
problem.
but
You
yes.
wouldn't want to put that on tape. Okay, have you got any last observations or points that you'd like to make? But before you do that, I'd like to make one point. That is, is there, in your opinion, a racial problem in the province between blacks and whites? Or
Well, I really can't answer that one, but I would just attempt to make any comment more in relationship to the immediate environment, that is the community in which I live in,
Yeah.
namely Moose Jaw. And my reaction would be no. I really think that for the number of people here, that is to say the few West Indians that I think I can recall, I don't really know of any problems that I could say that either them or myself has experienced to make it a thing. I don't really think that this happens here. It could be another place, so I can't really speak for Regina, but Moose Jaw, no, I think that the few blacks, if we use this term, seem to have integrated very well and seem quite really kind of sort of at ease, but I'm not speaking for the others, but just making that as a quick observation.
yeah, what would you say is the future of black immigrants in Saskatchewan? Like, is it going to be more? Is it?
Well, I can't say. I think I'd like to say what I think it should be. My bit would be that I would like to feel that it could be. There is room, put this way, for a lot more involvement in the sense of immigration, kinds of inclusion of blacks, namely West Indians, into Canadian society, and more so now in Saskatchewan. I think Saskatchewan could utilize quite a number of people who has some skills and could do well to contribute.
Okay, I'd like to thank you, Irvine, for talking with me, and maybe we'll get together and carry on sometime in the future.
Good, thank you.
Thank you.